show, I think you heard me, I clapped a bunch of times because,
Nice. I like that.
because just to make sure that you saw that it was a clap, because I
Nice.
don't have the
You're
the
thinking
clapper
like an
anymore.
engineer. That's
Yeah, I
really
know. I
nice.
miss having the clapper. I mean, there's some control issues going on here. Took the clapper away from me.
Well,
Oh
there
my
were
God.
people who were barely touching it.
Oh,
so
well,
you
that was not me.
No.
That's all right. I don't need it.
Okay, we got the go ahead.
Okay,
from
are we ready
Twitch.
to go?
We got the go ahead from YouTube.
Hallelujah. Okay.
Waiting for the go ahead from Facebook. You got it. Okay. Flip the switch. Red light is on.
It is.
Okay, when you hear the clapper, you're on.
Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thanks, Richard. And thank you to our friends at WBNY, Buffalo's original alternative radio station coming out of Buff State University. We thank them very much, and we're grateful to be on the air with WBNY. Also, I'm grateful to our indigenous friends who give us that good example of thankfulness and start every meeting or show off with thankfulness, thinking of Mother Earth that gives us everything we need, that the living waters, the waters of life, the creatures swimming and four-legged flying creatures, and all the plants, nutritional and medicinal, and the trees that give us the air, and all of the different elements in the creation, and of course our Creator that has given us the original instructions that we must follow if life is to continue in this creation, and the love that motivates. So thank you for that. So we have a little bit of a hybrid show today. I'm very excited to continue talking about justice needs, and that includes very heavily about the blizzard that we just experienced, the devastation of the blizzard that we just experienced here in Buffalo and Western New York. And then we're also going to get into talking a little bit about fascism. And back to, I think, if I had an overall thing for this, people, it's about our priorities, and our values, and what is the important thing to work on. So in terms of doing that, we have two very wonderful guests here who just, you can hear the immediately previous show. We've already been talking about it with Peter Rizzo. Peter, welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, Peter is an urban planner, and he is part of the Fair Fines and Fees Coalition. And, of course, our friend of the show, Mike Niman. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Professor Mike Niman, who is a media studies professor and communications professor at Buff State University, and also a friend and advisor to the Western New York Peace Center, and an author and commentator. So, so we're resuming the show. I'd still say, any particular value you want to bring up in this connection, Peter?
I like what you brought up in the last show, and that was love. And I think that we can harbor a lot of anger and hatred sometimes, and that's often our initial reaction. But at the same time, it needs to be underpinned with this notion of love for humanity. We're here to help and to serve other people. We're a society. We need to work together. And we hope that message is adopted and embraced by people in positions to make changes.
Right. Well, thank you. Thanks, Peter. And Mike?
I'll continue in the same theme,
Yeah.
And it's when we're facing problems, we're facing challenges, to remember love and think about the things in the world that you love. and the
Right.
people you love and the ideas that you love. And, we're incapacitated by thinking about hatred and the negative.
Mm-hmm.
That's why in the last show I was talking about, we need to vote people out of office, but we need to have a vision beyond that and vote people in office and look at solutions. So
Right.
love. And I was really impressed. And I was talking to Vicky about this last week when after the massacre, at Tops,
Mm-hmm.
the Buffalo Bills showed up the next day with their Choose Love T-shirts and bumper stickers, and to see an NFL campaign, and now they're just like making hearts all the time, and that's becoming and loving on each other, and like, oh my God, this reconstruction of masculinity in the heart of the NFL is really kind of like this is love, man. Wow, that's the fuel.
Yeah, it's all about love to me. It's always about love, and love has to be, number one, 1 through 101. It's what motivates. It's what motivates activism. It's what makes the world go round. There is that old song out of Carnival, "Love makes the world go round." But anyway, I think it's what gives meaning to life. But I also like to bring up about truth, and because truth, back to what you were saying about honesty, that truth. So the truth is that this community has been brutalized. The truth is that things should have been done differently, because you can tell by the result that we had. So I want to bring up one other thing, and I did touch on it just in the previous show, of reverence for life. So the things that we love, if we that reverence for life is one of the things that might be a determining factor in really both these conversations about the blizzard, but also about fascism. Is reverence for life a motivating factor in fascism? No,
Right.
no, it isn't. It is not. It is
Quite
not.
the opposite.
It's quite the opposite. That would be the
An
defining.
anti-humanist.
It would be the anti-love campaign. But anyway, I love what you said about the bills and the redefining of masculinity, because I am so excited about that, because it's such a thing to build on. Because
Well,
go ahead.
You want to defeat fascism, and I know we're jumping ahead of ourselves.
Right.
You just need to remind people who are supporting fascist policy that they love something. And if you can get them to think about what they love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something beyond some, some toxic pill that they've been fed, that they love their whiteness or something. But really get beyond the BS. What do you love? Who do you love? What do you care about? And suddenly, you're finding the way to defuse fascism. But we'll talk about that later in the hour.
Yes. Well, but anyway, I always love to talk about love. But anyway, so getting back to the blizzard, and I think let us go to that. One of the wonderful things about the terrible blizzard was the wonderful way that people were loving on each other. Not always, not exclusively, but there was so much of that. So I was just telling in the break, talking about this wonderful recognition dinner that was given up in Tonawanda to heroes and sheroes of the blizzard, people who were out there, who were seen on Facebook by the person who organized it. And that included Shakira Autry, who was the one who took in Joe, who was out there and is losing most of his fingers, or virtually all of his fingers and half of his thumb, I think now. But he would have died if it wasn't for her. So she heard him crying out there, and she brought him in, and she nursed him for 2-3 days, begging people to finally get him out. But so there was so much love that was shown by the people who really went out, searching for people. And some of the people who died, they were motivated by love. This young dad to be. He was about to become a dad within a week, and he went out to get things for his neighbors. And maybe not understanding how serious it was, or overestimating what he could do, but he was motivated by love. Anyway, I just think, we want to remember that in our talking about the blizzard, the wonderful heroics that some people did show, opening up the barbershop at CNC Cuts, etc. So how about some more thoughts on the blizzard, and maybe, Mike, if you want to start with some of the things that you didn't get to say yet. I know you had a story. Let's talk. Maybe we're going to talk about the looting, the whole looting mystique,
the meme about
or misinformation.
I had written about in the past, right after Katrina. I wrote about the supposed looting in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you started digging, and the news, they all covered it, they all covered it, because what it did is it justified, the police setting up a line, blocking people from trying to walk over a bridge to escape to the next parish, when New Orleans was being flooded underwater, and then actually shooting at and shooting people, right? And because why? Because New Orleans is supposed to be out of control and all looting and rioting and so on, which is, these are such, very thinly veiled, racist, tropes.
Right.
But when you started, so that was a big main, national news story. Then afterwards, when, journalists started drilling down deeper and community activists started drilling down deeper, that, the vast majority of the supposed looting that was reported didn't really happen. And that then there's a story in the Buffalo News, I believe it was, about a doctor from Buffalo who was at a conference in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, they're reporting on him as being a hero because he had set up a medical clinic in a hotel and was basically, treating people who were like in the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like going out to the Ninth Ward in a boat to try to, but
right.
What he did was fantastic and excellent.
Sure.
And what he did was he had, gone into a pharmacy, broke into a pharmacy with the help of the police
Mm-hmm.
to get all of these medications that he needed to set up this clinic when there were no available emergency services.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, isn't he a looter? Right?
Right.
White doctor.
Right.
The white doctor, with the blessing of white, I presume, cops, but,
Right.
So that reminded me about a story in the 2000 snowstorm.
Mm-hmm.
If you want me to recount that now.
Yeah, please.
I was at the dentist in
Mm-hmm.
Cheektowaga,
Uh-huh.
and the snow started coming down at 4 inches per hour. But, if the roads were clear, you just go. And, I make it back home, to Buffalo. But it was very poor planning, as
Again.
with this storm.
Right.
And it also wasn't forecast as well because we didn't have the skills in forecasting weather to pinpoint it the way we do now.
Right.
But the storm hit, in late morning, I think. And the mistake for that one was everybody, every business, every school, every institution, every factory, all at the same time. And said, oh, this is looking bad. We should shut down and send everybody home. And practically almost everybody who had a car in Western New York suddenly got on the road and gridlocked.
Right.
And
Right.
the roads are perfectly drivable, except that suddenly everybody gridlocked and the snow's coming down 4 inches per hour. And I'm inching along Genesee Street,
Right. Mm-hmm.
in Cheektowaga.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, man, I hope I make it to the east side before this thing shuts down and stops, because
Right.
I don't want to be out there in some snowstorm, freezing with no food, knocking on doors in the suburbs. And
Right.
this is just, from living in the city, it's a stereotype for the most part. But
Right.
and then again, it's not. I knew once I got to the east side,
Mhm.
and I actually got gridlocked just past Genesee Street heading west near the McDonald's. And sure enough, folks were out and about, we weren't there alone. And
So
everything
Genesee and
Bailey.
Bailey. Right. Mm-hmm.
Bailey Avenue, right.
Yep.
And, and the snow just kept coming down.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, I don't know, it was 2000. I don't know if I doubt I had a cell phone with me. And, went into, I had like $3 in cash. And for some reason, credit cards were, I have no idea what it was. But like I spent my $3 in cash on like little chocolate covered donuts and sitting in the car.
Uh-huh.
And, and it snows and snows and snows, trapped at that intersection with 3 school buses filled with like 3rd and 4th graders.
Oh my God.
Which I always joke about. For
Right.
me, that's my own personal hell, but.
No, I'd say
it's-
send me that. Send me over there. Yeah.
So it gets to be, and it's clear we're spending the night out there.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets to be, sundown and it's dark and, it's getting dark and the buses have been idling and they're getting cold and they got to turn the engines off.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, 3 busloads of kids.
Right.
We're like we go to the McDonald's and there's people in there and they, the people who are working there just close the doors because their bosses called them up and told them to stop serving food and close the doors and lock the place up. And I'm pleading with them to open the doors, me and a few other, the bus drivers and different people, that we got to get these kids into here and get people in there to shelter. And I decide that they're not doing it. So I decide that, listen, we've got to kick in one of these windows and bring everybody into the McDonald's. And, I also decided that I think I was the only person who looked like me. Right.
Right.
So, I'm the only, person who's appearing as
Mm-hmm.
presenting as a white person, and like I've got to do this,
Right.
right? So I got my boots on, and I'm, putting my back and I'm kicking at this window. This is the embarrassing part, right? The embarrassing part is I couldn't break the damn window,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow somebody got the idea that, somehow we called the police or the people in the McDonald's called the police,
Mm-hmm.
but almost instantly, a police officer showed up on a snowmobile,
Mm-hmm.
and he ordered the folks in the McDonald's to unlock the door.
Mm-hmm.
And by then, on the radio, the county government had already said there's going to be a state of emergency declared, and we'll be reimbursing businesses for their expenses and feeding people.
Mm-hmm.
Any businesses that can feed people, just keep records of this.
Mm-hmm.
And, we told the folks in the McDonald's that, listen, and the police officer told them, you've got to start making food and giving it to these people and keep those records. So the reason why I'm bringing that story up, and that story goes on and on, like what it's like to be in a McDonald's all night long with 3 busloads of children.
Uh-huh.
But, and lots of parents started getting ways to get over there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as harsh it wasn't technically a blizzard. It was just a hell of a lot of snow, about 4 feet.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing was that when somebody finally called the police, and this is a situation that would be in the news for looting, right?
Mm-hmm.
They broke into McDonald's and started stealing all the food. And when somebody called the police came almost instantly on a snowmobile. And that they ordered the business to open up. And that's why there was no looting there, right? Because it was the same exact thing, except that it was sanctioned. And we saw this in Cheektowaga, where the gentleman you're just referring to did the same thing.
Withy.
Broke into a school, and he probably thought that he'd wind up being arrested.
Mm-hmm.
He expected it.
And that, right. And again, he's a hero.
Right.
But there are other stories about people who broke in someplace. What about that father who went out looking for food? Okay, he died. What if he didn't die? What if he or somebody else going out looking for food for their neighbors and everything is locked up? And that wasn't the case in other communities. And again, that goes fear. Why do they say to lock the McDonald's up when people are going to actually need that McDonald's? So it's fear that causes people to lock themselves into buildings filled with food. And when you dig deeper into the looting and look at what was looted, there's some stuff that clearly people, I heard, I didn't see, people were stealing a couch. And there's a bar, a wine bar,
Sneakers.
people were stealing liquor. But if you look overall, we have burglaries every single day in the city of Buffalo.
Right.
That's not unusual. They're not being brought into the news that there's looting going on out there. You can count those burglaries that seem to be like burglaries. There are not overwhelmingly, what was looted? Dollar Generals.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going into
Right.
the Dollar General for any kind of like, electronics or anything like that. And even when they went in with the news and to show you all the damage done, all the shelves with the food were wiped bare, and the rest of the store was like pretty, right, it was still stocked. So again, this trope of looting, and I'm sure that bad things happened, but also remarkably, for what you think of, there was nobody who was injured that I've ever heard about from any of these incidents.
Right.
There was no violence involved. And then the stores that were looted, rental stores, furniture rental stores,
Right.
stores that have been, this biggest story, there's been looting going on all along. And yeah, it's terrible what happened to the Rite Aids, but the Rite Aid on Grant Street, I remember going into Rite Aids once I think I had in my investigative reporting class doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Take an item, a common item, like isopropyl rubbing alcohol. Rite Aid on Delaware Avenue, it was sold for $1. Rite Aid on Grant Street, it was sold for $1.49. Same size, same everything. And over, inner city communities where, people don't have transportation options, driving around and getting all the
Right.
sale prices, tend to have the most expensive prices because it's expensive to be poor. When I was in
Right.
high school, I had a night job doing inventory all over the New York City area
Mm-hmm.
of closed supermarkets after they closed for the night. And I found the most expensive food in the entire metro New York area was in the South Bronx, and the cheapest was in some place called Comac, Long Island, right? So, I mean, there's this perspective, too, on what's happening in these incidences whereby, all of your support structures collapse, you're hungry, but look at the businesses that were so-called targeted. There were places that had food locked up, but there were also, with the rental center, places where everybody in the community has heard some story about somebody who paid 4 times what something was worth, in these monthly rental fees,
Right.
only to have it
Right.
repossessed because they missed a payment. And that's also been the cause of urban unrest because of these usurers and this outright, financial abuse of communities. So when I started hearing that it was rental centers, again, it's like, put the looting into perspective.
Right.
I'm not excusing it. I'd
Right.
much rather see, some kind of a class action lawsuit. I'd much rather see some political solution, but most of this was food and a few predatory businesses that, so yeah, and that becomes a major story. At the same time, people, again, go over the magic line into Kenmore, had emergency services, had access to food. And, we're talking, a lot of this so-called looting didn't take place until you get into the 3rd day of this storm.
Right.
And then 4 days, 5 days, streets are still blocked. People can't get to work. So yeah, the looting thing was just such a massive distraction and such a dishonor to the, more than a dishonor, such a disgrace,
Yes.
in light of
Mhm.
the people who died and what was actually happening to the communities. And they're going out, putting out this story to the nation that these poor communities are being looted. No, these poor communities have been looted,
Right. Right.
and this is an emergency situation. And in no way, of course, somebody's going to twist my words and say I'm supporting looting and I'm condoning looting and so on. But no, that's not what we're talking about at all.
Right.
We're just talking about, dropping this same pre-scripted story into the middle of our emergency. It's hard to love people who are doing that.
Right. Right. Peter?
It's absolutely horrendous. And we mentioned in the first hour that we live in the 3rd poorest city in the nation, in the United States. There are many, many families, many households that do not have food. Children who go to bed hungry every single night. Children who don't have something as basic as underwear. I mean, my sister buys underwear for her children at school. It's disgraceful. And when you have that kind of a situation, Byron Brown knows we're the 3rd poorest city. Mark Poloncarz knows Buffalo is the third poorest city. Where is their poverty plan? None of them have presented it. They don't have a poverty plan. They don't have a strategy for getting people the assistance and services they need, helping them rise up. Because when they, as India said in her campaign, when they rise up, we all rise up. It's absolutely the truth. Before we get too far off, I just want to, for those who experience damage to their home, it is imperative, and I've talked to folks who tried to contact the city for assistance, and they got zero help. Zero help. Thank you, Mayor Brown, for providing zero help to residents of the city who tried to contact you. When folks finally reach New York State, that is where they found assistance. And we're going to put into the comment section or the notes under the video on YouTube at least, a link to a form that you should fill out if you experience damage to your home. New York State and the Erie County are taking inventory at the direction of New York State of homes that were damaged, and assistance will somehow be provided. It's unknown yet how exactly that will happen, but at least have it documented. There are people whose homes were absolutely destroyed. A friend of mine, the pipes burst in her walls. Those pipes were behind plaster. They were wrapped in asbestos. Now, asbestos abatement. Guess what? That's not covered by homeowners insurance. She still has today. Now, we're how many days since the storm? She's got giant fans trying to dry what is left of the interior of her home. Right. And it's just one person.
One of our comments on Facebook says 27 days. So thank you for that comment and for that number. 27 days afterwards, people are still facing these issues. And so the relief for assistance, can you just read it aloud too for anybody who's just listening?
It's literally a form that was
for how they can find it.
Yeah. So again,
online.
It's difficult to find, and that's why.
Sure.
So we have provided the link. It's on YouTube. So you'd search "Talking Peace," Western New York Peace Center. Find it on YouTube.
And also, it'll be for WBNY. It will be in the live stream comments description of the show. It will be there too. But can you just read it aloud for anybody who can't get that far?
Sure. It's the 211 WNY, Western New York, Disaster Damage Reporting Form. It is a Google form. It says 211 WNY is collecting damage data from those who were impacted by the blizzard of 22. This data will be used to report back to the city of Buffalo and Erie County. And you can complete it. It's asking for your name, your address, your contact information, household type, whether you rent or own, whether you have homeowners insurance or not, or renter's insurance. Many people do not. Describe the extent of damage, and were you displaced by the damage to your home, and are you still in need of assistance?
So also people should be able to call 211. If you can't find it, if it's not popping up, call 211. Tell them you need that to find out how to find that form or where you can pick it up if you don't have internet access. So that's one thing. Another thing, we talked in the last show, and I want to mention now, the Fair Fines and Fees Coalition that the Western New York Peace Center is part of. Both Peter and I are part of, and started with Reverend George Nicholas, and other, there's lots of different groups that are part of it. Black Love Resisting the Rust and the Western New York Peace Center, Western New York Law Center, a lot of different actors. And one of the campaigns that we talked about in the previous hour, the Just Streets campaign, is about reimagining safety. And one of the big things about it is also about getting the police out of traffic enforcement. Because if we've seen one thing, we've seen time after time where the police in traffic enforcement end up it ends up with a fatality over trivia because of overreacting and and racist responses to people's legitimate fear of what's happening, and sure enough, these people are killed. I mean, so the police need to be out of traffic enforcement. There's other ways of doing it. We can talk about that. So anyway, you can find the Fair Fines and Fees Coalition. Either go on Facebook and look up Fair Fines and Fees Coalition. Fair Fines No Fees Coalition is our secret name. We did get those fines taken off, 15 fines and fees that were put on by the Brown administration when they moved the ticketing authority into the city because they were profiting, again, that extractive, punitive mindset. So those fees have been eliminated. We got we were instrumental in getting the cameras taken down, and we've still got a lot more work to do. So you're welcome to join that group. So I'd like to say about the looting. The other thing that I think about it is, as you say, so many other settings, it wasn't called looting when people in Kenmore, if somebody broke in to get food, it was not being called looting. So that's the one thing. And then for the looting that did take place, and there was some, I know some people are very upset about some neighborhood businesses that were not extractive that also got robbed. How that was the priority over the people who are dying and freezing to death, that's the part, that's the rub. Because that was made the priority. That was an emergency. All of a sudden on Sunday, Christmas Day, that's what they're worrying on. Not the people who are dying in the street and in their cars and in their homes. So that to me, and the other thing about looting, people in Buffalo are hurt and angry, traumatized. So, it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's a reason. It is a reason. When people see that they're being treated like second-class citizens, that they don't have the advantages, that they don't have the infrastructure, that they don't have the plans in place for people's needs, that people didn't have food, that people can't afford 4 days or a week's worth of food or the time to go out and get it. I mean, so when people are angry, when people feel justified in doing a wrong thing because they're so angry, it's not, again, I just can't say it enough. It's not an excuse, but it is a reason. Things need to be done differently in this city. We need to recognize the amount of racism in the policies that we have, that the policies are not meant to care for people's needs. But they are meant to care for property rights and profitability and et cetera.
Ask yourself this question. Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, what would you do if you had no food? What would you do?
Right.
You'd do exactly what these people did.
Right, especially because your kids are hungry.
Right.
You would do what they did.
I mean, that's about love. They're acts of love. You can't put any other term.
when like I said, when it was about stealing a bunch of sneakers or whatever it is, I know there's somebody.
Different story.
So
Yeah.
fine, but that's the priority. You're going after people with sneakers versus saving people who are freezing to death in the snowbank. Go ahead.
And just for clarification, I don't think any of us is saying that we don't want the police to respond to ongoing crimes and burglaries and so on, because we need sneaker stores to be able to survive blizzards so we can buy sneakers.
Right.
But it's not a matter of them using human power to get out there and board up places whose doors have been compromised. They went out there and left the doors open and then spent hours staking them out so they can arrest whoever walked through, and then hit the news and say, we have a looting arrest, we have a burglary arrest. In all likelihood, those are going to be tossed in court, because it's entrapment. So it wasn't a matter about protecting the businesses. It was a matter about arresting people and luring them in to this, to this open door. And that's like, why are you doing that in the middle of a blizzard? Like, why are you doing that ever? But why are you doing that in the middle of a blizzard when there are so many other ways that you could be saving people? And I'm sure that for many of the police officers, they would probably rather be saving people. I had a friend who was emergency, who was a, what do you call it, who was a nurse.
EMS?
And she got, she was actually, she was doing these field clinics, but she got addicted to saving lives,
Right.
I mean, there's some kind of,
Right.
I'm sure that the cops would rather have come back with stories about lives that they saved rather than, we waited a half an hour and this poor sucker came in and we nabbed him. We waited until he picked something up and then we got him. That's not the stories that they want to come home from work with. That's probably not where they became cops, to give them the benefit of the doubt. Not across the board, but, how'd you like that assignment as a police officer? Talk about your bosses giving you these, moronic assignments that, workers always have to tell. So, the looting thing's complicated. None of us are coming here and saying, well,
Right.
They're charging too much for sneakers, so it's cool.
No.
They might have been charging too much for sneakers. We're not supporting that. But what we're talking about is reality. And in reality, there was not much looting at all compared to the amount of love that we saw. And historically, it's all about love. It's all about everyday people suddenly becoming heroes and risking their lives to help strangers. And as we mentioned in the last show, going across, race, going across boundaries of race in this hyper-segregated, city, going across boundaries of social class to bring strangers into your homes, and that was a narrative here, and they got soiled. I don't know why, why we had, our local news and, City Hall pushing this looting story, which was such a small part of what happened. And thankfully, much of the national media, meaning, serious news agencies, saw through that and focused on the story about heroics. But this is also the kind of stuff that you put out there for, a Fox News operation to just drip their teeth into. And it supports all of the racist memes that are in their information ecosystem. So why is our city government feeding into that?
So I think this is a good segue into talking about fascism, because I want to talk about priorities and about values and how they relate to the rise of fascism in this country, and feelings, because I think there are some feelings in there, and the biggest one is fear and misinformation that are feeding just a horrific and dangerous rise of fascism nationally, internationally, and even locally, because some of the things we're talking about, back to the priorities and the values in the system. So can we start, Mike? What would you want to say about that?
Well, I mean,
Go ahead.
We're in a scary historical time where fascism is ascendant. But historically, fascism has never won. It sticks around sometimes for, way too long. And there are too many people who, too many communities are destroyed. But fascism starts with a big tent, and you start with fear, which is based oftentimes in misinformation or some scapegoat that you can then, fear. Trump played with a few different scapegoats, Mexicans, whatnot, and then you have to, fascists always have to have a head-on assault on verifiable empirical reality, because reality is never kind to fascist movements. Honest, true reporting is never kind. So what you do is you just create doubt. You manufacture doubt on all information sources. So it becomes he said versus she said. He said, it's just an argument. But basically right now, you have accurate reporting of events and then total mythologies. So you can't have a political conversation it's interesting when you get to talking to people who are supporting candidates and politicians now who by all definitions of the term are fascist.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk to them, they don't believe in fascism. In fact, many of them think themselves to be anti-racist, and many of them, most of them would support most policies that the three of us would be supporting, about labor rights and personal, reproductive liberty and things like that.
Uh-huh.
But what we wind up arguing about is not about policy. We wind up arguing about reality.
Uh-huh.
And you get all these like wild stories. It just goes back to that, what, Goebbels and Hitler termed as the big lie. You repeat it long enough and it becomes a truth. Except for the big lie to really dig in and work, you need to do what Vladimir Putin started out in 2003 doing, which was shutting down all opposition media until by the time you get, 10 years into his governance, you've got an information monopoly. And then you can start controlling what people perceive as reality. We don't have that here at this point in time. We don't have that information monopoly. And so we're in a condition, that's called pre-fascism. But the thing is, when you start looking at what happens to what's the end story for all fascist movements, is that they start out with this big tent, and then as they gain more power, they start attacking more and more of the people. So ultimately, right now, you've all kinds of diverse folks are welcome into the coalition, and then as they start gaining power, then they start becoming more and more racist and more, misogynistic, and ultimately they keep narrowing down the base of power until it comes to one person, until it comes to one person at the top, and ultimately, what happens is that fascist movements collapse because other fascists want to be at the top. And that and ultimately, if you look at the politicians that I'm terming as fascists in this society, they're not promoting any policy.
Right.
It's just about power. And they'll switch their rhetoric and make up reality as they need to gain more power. You can't have all these people crazed for power without them competing against each other. And you're starting to see that right now in the U.S. Congress. And if you remove the charismatic character at the top of a fascist pyramid, then you just start seeing lots of infighting. And at that point in time, it's a matter of, trying to educate people to discern reality from total BS. And that's the basics of media literacy. So that's where we are right now. It's an information war. And, it's very frightening because you've got a big chunk of the country who has no real, who's thinking, tribally, in the negative sense, not the positive sense. And that this is my tribe. And these are the facts we believe. And this is our idea of truth. And when you dig down into it, many of those folks know it's not true. The smarter ones, the more intelligent ones, but they're going to promote it because anything that undermines reality. So anyway, that's my perspective on fascism as, critical communication studies scholar.
So let me ask you this, because when I think of fascism, I think of, I mentioned a couple of the things, but one of the main ones is that it's when big business takes over the government. So that when the corporate interests become the primary interests and the 1% are running the government. So the other thing I think of is they keep calling it populist. When I hear people saying that people like he who shall not be named, that different fascists are populists. I can't believe what I'm hearing, because they're not about the people. They're only about, back to what you said, my tribe. And then,
but they're popular. But they're popular as personalities.
popular, but not populist.
Right.
Not populist about the people, interested in the people.
Well,
is it?
They don't have to be interested in the people. They just have to be backed by the people.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're seeing with a lot, and this goes back to like Father Coughlin and the history of fascism in this country and fascism around the world. Hitler was extremely popular.
Right.
Putin is popular, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of, what you're doing is you give up all discussion of policy for people who are being crushed by bad policy that hurts them, and you keep it all on a cult of personality. Yeah, the definition of, there's so many textbook definitions of fascism, but there is, and I argue all the time with Bill Weinberg, New York, journalist who I've spoken, and who's like, no, he goes with that corporate, and that's a correct definition, but the more popular, definition of fascism is not just this one type of fascism where you might have this economic interest. That sounds more like oligarchy to me. And that, and it goes beyond that. It's about the same set of tools and the same set of historical conditions, which is a full frontal assault on reality, on verifiable reality. And there's the source that I like, to use the most. I'm getting up, away from the camera, is this book here. How Fascism Works: The Politics of Us and Them by Jason Stanley. And I use it in my propaganda class because how fascism works is so much entwined with the mediated perceptions that fascists create. How fascists want to control the narrative, so it becomes about something really silly like looting, as opposed to something really important, which is a failed emergency response that's leaving a community with people dying. Mm-hmm. So it's always about changing the topic to something that supports the rise of the fascists. There's different, academics will argue about definitions of fascism. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the history of fascism, it all comes together in a few key things. Attack verifiable reality, create alternatives, misinformation, take control of the media. So ultimately misinformation becomes the only information. And we see that in North Korea. We see that right now, has formed in Russia, which, was a fairly, interesting society 15 years ago, coming out of, a long, period of authoritarian, state draft. But anyway, I've gone on a rant here.
I that's very interesting. And of course, it's so important what you said, the media in this connection, and back to truth or lack of truth. So
and also,
go ahead.
Fascism instead of the fascist, because I know with discussions you and I have had in the past, and there are people who are looking into, local folks who, they're identifying as fascists and so on. Mm-hmm. And it's like, don't focus on the fascists, focus on the fascism, right? Right. Because if you focus on the fascists, you'll be alarmed, and overwhelmed by how many people you're suddenly calling fascist, who under other circumstances and conditions would be out there risking their lives to save somebody who's very unlike themselves, who is freezing in a snowbank in front of their house. Go
ahead.
No, I'm done.
Well, you just made me think of this. I think that it's so key that people should realize. Let me say, one time I was talking with somebody who's quite, let's say, politically Republican. And he said, as we were talking more, he said, well, I think we have very different values. And I said, I doubt that we have very different values. I think we have a very different idea of what is going on. back to what you said about what is the reality of the situation. So I think of two things. One, that people, they may not know what's going on, so they only know what they're hearing. If all you listen to is Fox News, that's all you're hearing. So you believe it. If this is your trusted source. The other thing is people get locked into a community. So if all your friends are thinking one way, this is cult behavior, right? That we know that even when the cognitive dissonance is getting difficult, people still, they won't abandon it, or it takes a lot before a person will abandon it, because a lot of times you're abandoning your entire support network, all your friends and family, they're all in this thing. If you don't agree, you're out of the picture. You're an outcast, you're a traitor, or you're whatever. So people will stay locked in and they'll ignore evidence to the contrary because it's too hard to buck all of that in your community, which is all going that way, believing the lie.
Yeah. Fascism is not about independent thinkers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Fascism is about following.
Right.
And you don't want to be the person who is going to be the target of all of your angry fellow community members.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you're all united together.
Right.
There's libtards out there.
Right.
So that, and you don't want to be, and it goes back to I think about homophobia growing up in my neighborhood in South Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
So people had to perform homophobia just so nobody would think that they were gay, in which case they would then be the victims of the homophobia that they know all too well because they've been perpetuating it. And it's the same thing with fascism. So it's not about policy whatsoever. I don't like it when people use the term conservative to describe fascists.
No, well, it has nothing to do with that.
About fascism, right? There's nothing conservative about fighting against reproductive liberty either. Reproductive freedom. This is not conservative. These words are getting all twisted up, right? And we're losing the language to talk about what's going on here. But the people that are a threat to power, people who are denying elections, the people who want to, suspend the Constitution, right? They are not patriots. They are not putting this country first.
No.
They are not conservatives, and they're not traditional Republicans. They're people who have hijacked the Republican Party.
Right.
And Joe Luzzi was a very well-known right-wing Republican commentator with, I think, his Politics WNY was his blog, and he'd be quoted oftentimes in the media. And Joe is a friend of mine. We had fantastic policy disagreements, and we would have very lively meetings over lunch and discuss them. And I would invite him in to speak to my classes to liven up the discussion, because students are just too quick to all parrot what the professor what they think the professor thinks. Right. So I really miss arguments with conservatives. Right. And old Republicans, because it sharpens my idea of policy, it sharpens their ideas of policy, and we get to really articulate our thoughts better. Right. And there's nobody out there on, in this fascist movement, who I'm not going to sit down with, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Bobart, or, it's like, I don't want to sit at a table with people who just look at me and want me dead because of my ethnicity, right? Right. So, there's no policy discussion, because fascism is not about policy. Right. It's about control. Mm-hmm. And so they'll call themselves communists in the Stalinist era, but it smells a lot like fascism. The Nazis were fascists, but they call themselves National Socialists. Right. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter. It's fascism, and that's the F word. Nobody would use the F word in 2015 and 2016 when fascists were ascending into elective power, because it was too controversial to call a fascist a fascist. So we're stripped of the very language to describe the political movement that we're seeing unfold in front of us that threatens our lives.
Although they were very quick to start talking about Antifa, like anti-fascist was a bad thing. So that was a little suspect.
My dad was an anti-fascist. I always,
Right.
anytime,
Mine
he
too.
fought in World War II
Mine too. Yeah.
rather heroically,
Right.
and had killed many fascists. That's a way to shut down a conversation. My dad, my dad killed lots of folks like you. But it's like I got to remember the.
Well,
the
this
love
is
thing,
where
right?
this is where we just.
I got to show my love.
Well, it's truth and love. I always want to come back to that, because when people can at least share their truth, and maybe even Marjorie Taylor Greene, if at a moment, maybe when there's not a big, or but just anyway, whoever it is, that we're sharing our truth and listening to the other person, that's where, everyone has at least 2% of the truth. That's what one social worker I said.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, I doubt she believes anything she espouses. So you're not going to sit down and just get to the truth and
Because
have this
she won't,
eureka
right.
moment, because, and this is what you're seeing with a lot of these fascists in Congress, is that they don't believe
It's
anything
posturing.
that they're saying.
No, right.
Right?
Right.
It's basically about, I remember in college, I could run in front of a crowd and grab a microphone and get the whole audience cheering at a demonstration. But, people get addicted to that. And then ultimately, they won't be talking about policy. They'll just be talking about whatever it is to get the crowd cheering. And then suddenly you adopt that toxic message as your message because you're now a leader.
Well, I want to say, first of all, you're giving me more ideas for shows, and I know that Deidre will do plenty of them. So, so we're grateful to have Talking Peace. Grateful that you've come on. Thank you. I'm so glad that we had some more time to talk about the blizzard, because that really needs to be discussed, and it needs to continue to be discussed. And so does this, because we have a lot of work to do, but we're doing it. So couldn't be more grateful to you, Mike, for coming on, to you, Peter, for coming on. These are important issues, and we're going to keep talking about them. Meanwhile, I'll just mention, the Western New York Peace Center does have an open house and annual meeting this coming weekend, Sunday. So it's at 1272 Delaware. You can see it on our website, wnypeace.org. But meanwhile, thank you so much.
I just want to also thank Peter, because I come on your radio show and I'm really good about identifying problems. Peter's working on solutions.
Well, we're all you're working on solutions too. Yes, you are. I know you are. That's what you're doing at Buff State, right? That people can see through the things. Anyway.
I'm trying to spread the love.
Right. Spread the love. We will. So that it's been a great show. Thank you. Thank you both so very much. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, listeners. And this is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love.